So, we are going for our next talk with Homer. And just for your information, I would like to give a small intro about Homer. He's a front end dev by day, and he's a maker of music by night. And currently, he's working as a senior UI engineer, and he's a certified accessibility professional. And with a background in behavioral psychology, with a focus in neurology and art. And he focuses more on accessible front-end development along with clean, intuitive design. Yeah, I believe this is a very much impressive background of Homer. So even I would like Homer to introduce himself to all of you. That would be very much great.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the talk. Wherever you are, I hope that you are healthy and safe. I've got a lot to cover. I hope this is informative, and I hope everyone gets something that they can take out and take back to their teams, back to their jobs, and hopefully impact those teams for and make a change for the better. So my talk today is going to be on the 4 principles of accessibility. And I first like to start off, when we're building websites, when we're building these interactive experiences, it's always best that we keep everyone in mind. We always start off with the best intentions, but it's very possible that, as time goes on, those intentions kind of fall by the wayside and we no longer pay attention to them. And that can be a problem. Case in point, this image here that you see is, this was me walking down the street, and, we have these at every intersection so that it makes it easier for us to cross the street, avoid traffic and so forth. And here in Atlanta, traffic is crazy. People will run you over. It's insane. So you definitely have to be careful. But if you notice, over time, they've allowed this palm bush to overgrow the corner, which makes it difficult to actually get to the buttons, to be able to access the buttons in order for you to cross the street safely. And what you can't see in this photo is that on the end of each of those palms are really small needles. So as you would reach over to push the button, most likely you'd get stabbed. And it just wasn't a pleasant experience. So you hear people talking about accessibility. A lot of people ask why we have to even worry about it. Even more so, I get questions of, where do we even start with accessibility? And hopefully with this talk, you'll have those tools as soon as I'm done. So let's start off. So all over the globe, the major economies have some form of laws or regulations that govern accessibility. Over in the EU, they have Directive EU 2016-2102, the Disability Acts from 1995 in the UK, and we also have the Disability Act here from 1990. And what this does is that its aim is to add equality for individuals with disabilities and grant them the same access that any able-bodied person would have to facilities and services, so that no one is actually left out. There are 70 economies or 70 countries all over the globe that actually have laws in place that govern how we should treat accessible properties currently right now. So if you see your country on this list, I would strongly suggest that you take some time to do the research on that if you already don't know about the accessibility laws that are in your country. And why is it important? Well, 15% of the world's population has reported that they have a disability. That's roughly a billion people. Here in the United States, roughly 11% of the population, the entire population from Gen X to millennials, has a disability. So, that's from the ages of 21 to 64. And one thing to keep in mind is that as populations get older, the chances of having some form of a disability increases. One that you can probably all relate to is when you see someone wearing glasses. That means that their eyesight is no longer 20/20. And individuals with low vision also have issues when they are, looking at websites that are built and they're not responsive because they use certain tools that an able-bodied person wouldn't use, like browser zoom or screen magnification, in order to navigate. And so when we think about disabilities, often the image that you see in front right now is what comes to mind. So you have two gentlemen having a conversation who are deaf and they are using sign language. You may think of someone who has prosthetic limbs, or you may think of someone who, is walking around with a cane because they're blind and they have a seeing eye dog. And then you also have the gentleman that's in the wheelchair. Those are all disabilities that we can perceive, that we can see, that we can observe without the individual actually having to tell us anything. But what we really have to be concerned with are the invisibilities. These are the disabilities that you can't see. If I weren't wearing my glasses right now and I had contacts on, you wouldn't know that I had low vision. But one that really stands out are cognitive disabilities. Now, cognitive disabilities are the number one disability around the globe. They affect the largest population. You have autism, attention deficit, and memory loss. All of these play a part in how they use technology. So we have to be mindful of that, especially nowadays. Right now, with the world dealing with the pandemic, we have a term that is called long COVID. And what long COVID is that it describes the long lasting effects of those who have survived COVID. And these effects are starting to affect them cognitively. And one of the reasons that this is a problem is because if we start to design applications that do not take these cognitive disabilities, into mind, or even consider them when we're doing the applications, when we're building the applications, we can start to leave an entire population of people out. And as you can see there's about a 20 to 70% effective rate from this. And these numbers are early. There are studies still going on right now. Nothing has been finalized, but these are the preliminary studies that have come out since late last year. And again, they're still ongoing. These numbers do not represent any one particular age group. It is a wide range of age group from young to old. Then we also have to remember that not all disabilities are permanent, but also not all impairments are disabilities. So what I mean by a disability that's not permanent, if you break your finger, say for instance, you break your finger and that's the finger that you use to click with. A broken finger is a temporary disability. You have that cast on your finger. You don't have the same type of mobility that you would normally have if your finger wasn't broken. An impairment would be if you are in an environment where you can't hear the message clearly because the ambient noise is too loud. Or if you're just out in bright sunlight and it's hard to see the screen on your portable device because of the glare and the UI is not bright enough to counteract those. So we have to be mindful of those as well. Then there's the accessibility and money. You know, we have a lot of developers here in this conference right now, but we also have individuals who are interested from a business perspective and how accessibility affects their business. So here in the United States, it is reported that roughly $490 billion of disposable income are related to individuals with disabilities. 10.3 billion of that alone comes from individuals with just a visual disability. So if you think about that for a second, e-commerce websites are the number one, failures for accessibility globally. So we have to do a better job of building out these e-commerce websites. Health websites come after that, banking websites and so forth. But if you are building a website that does not take into consideration individuals who have a visual disability, this is the type of money that is being left on the side that companies just are not earning. Then there's also the legal aspect. Like I said earlier, there are 70 countries who have some form of accessibility regulations that that companies need to adhere to. Here in the United States, you can see that cases have been on the rise. They rose 23% since 2019. 2020, 3,550 cases so far this year. And we're not even in June yet. It's crazy. Part of the reason is because of the failures with desktops when users are primarily on their computers, sitting at their computers, especially, during COVID when everyone was in lockdown. This really exposed the cracks in a lot of the applications that exist today that no one even considered to even test for accessibility. And as you can see, ever since the decline, accessibility lawsuits here in the United States rose 50%. And that's because everybody was basically at home. So what do? We got to make everything accessible. When I say that, a lot of people get nervous because they think that, oh my gosh, I got to tear down, my application and build it from the ground up. This is going to be super difficult and super expensive, and we don't have the time or the resources to do that. And that's really a big myth that a lot of people would want you to believe. Me as an accessibility professional, I've been in those situations and worked at companies where, their applications weren't accessible. And me and my team had to do the work to actually bring them up to speed. And I know the growing pains that go into it that you would have to go through, and it's not as bad as you think. So first, I'd like to introduce you to the 4 principles of accessibility: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. The acronym is POUR. Now, when you think of perceivable, this means that users must be able to perceive the content that is within your application, your digital product. They must be able to use their senses to basically understand and perceive the information that you are giving to them, whether it's they may be using a Braille reader or a Braille tablet, such as the one that's pictured here. You need to make sure that your UI is nice and clear. Color contrasts are great. Even your content has to be written in a way to where, users do not have issues with them. Then you have operable. Not everybody uses digital devices the same way. You have individuals who have motor disabilities who can't use a mouse. Um, Oftentimes you have keyboard input. That's one of the top modes of input for any digital device that we have. And as you can see here, we have different type aids that users are using to be able to input data. You have binary switches. You also have sip and puff type of mechanisms that individuals would use to navigate through web applications and so forth. Then you have understandable. Understandable comes down to how your content is written. Are you writing content that is so specific to your industry that the average person cannot comprehend or even understand what it is that you're actually talking about? There was a company that I worked for, early on in my career, back in the early 2000s, where we actually had a product that when I started, the product had a really strong scientific name. Unfortunately, I can't actually talk about that because of agreements, but no one understood what the actual product was. But then after they did focus groups and things like that, and they realized that if they made the name of the product more friendly for consumers, then sales will go up. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as they changed the name, sales skyrocketed through the roof because now people actually understand. The same thing goes for any of our content that goes inside the websites. You have to make sure that you present the correct context for your users. So links, for instance, it's really a bad practice when you have a link that just says click here, because click here does not actually inform the user as to what that link is supposed to do. So be mindful of how copy is written as well when you're guiding the user through their journey. I have a screenshot here for a website that at some point in time, I would suggest that you all try. I played it, and it's the reason that I lost all my hair. My beard went gray. It's really stressful. It's called User Interface. It is a horrible game. But basically what you try to do is get through really bad UX practices and try to get to the end. So I challenge everybody to try that and just let me know how it goes. But don't get mad at me if you get too stressed out. And then the last one, last but not least, we have robust. Robust means that we are building our applications and our websites and our products so that they are available to a wide range of assistable tech. That means, again, we need to meet our users where they are with what they're using, whether they're using nothing but keyboards, whether they're using a mouse, whether they're using braille readers and so forth. We need to be able to meet them where they are. And we start by doing that with semantic markup. That's our coding practices. So what I'm going to go through now is I'm going to talk about some common coding practices and some common errors that I find when I do accessible audits of applications. So last year, WebAIM did a survey, top 1 million sites, global. And what they found was that of those 1 million sites, 98.1% of them failed. Their homepages failed. That means no accessibility or the bare minimum was done. Of these websites, 60% of them had incorrect uses of ARIA tags. Now, a lot of people may not understand what ARIA are, and I'm going to get into that. So we have standards that we have to follow. We start with the HTML standard 5.2, and then we walk with the WCAG. Now, the WCAG actually sets up the various success criteria that your application should meet in order to be considered accessible. And then we have ARIA. ARIA comes into play because of our dynamic nature of our React applications that we're building now, where single page applications can do a lot and they don't behave like, traditional websites. So within the WCAG, we have different levels that are recommended to meet. Now, all of the governing rules and regulations for all 70 countries that I spoke about earlier, they recommend meeting level AA. And I'll get to that. So level single A is doing the bare minimum, pretty much like the image that I showed you with the cactus growing in front of the buttons that allow you to cross the street, or even in this image here where, wheelchair ramp available, just ask us at the counter. Well, that's kind of inconvenient. Yes, you did some work and be like, here's a wheelchair ramp. We offered it to you, but it's not always there. You actually got to go out of your way to come get it. Not really accessible. That's the bare minimum. Then you have level AAA. AAA is a daunting task to make. Rarely do I see a project that comes through that even comes close to being fully AAA compliant. It's doable, but extremely difficult. And that's what leads us to the sweet spot here. Kind of like the Goldilocks theory, too big, too small, right in the middle, just right. We have level AA. Now, level AA is much easier to reach, and it's going to cover a lot of the situations and the circumstances and things like that you will come across when you are authoring your code for your website or your product. So that's where we want to aim for. Everyone should look at the success criteria inside the WCAG, find the rules that apply to your project, and strive for level AA. And that brings us into semantics. Semantics are how we write our code. It is the best practice for making a site accessible, because out the gate, if you're writing semantic markup, you're going to actually catch a lot of those accessibility pitfalls that 98.1 of the sites are missing. And one way to maintain those is to build your components and then add them to a design system or a component library, because now what you're doing is that you're allowing for other developers to come in and grab components that are already accessible and already have those hooks built in, and reintroducing them back into the application. So garbage in, garbage out. If you correct everything going in for the first time, you don't have to worry about it coming out the second time, unless you have a developer that just decides to go rogue and change everything. Well, then you've got to go back in and test. But semantic markup is definitely where you want to start. Starting with buttons and links. This one seems to confuse a lot of developers, and rightfully so. Because when you're in a hurry and you're writing something, you're writing your code, a lot of people start with divs, they start with spans. They don't think about the actual semantic elements that they would need to use. And, you'll see people ask, well, when do you use a link versus a button? Real easy. If the URL is going to change, use a link. If the URL doesn't change, use a button. It's that simple. And what's nice about that is that when you use buttons, or I should say, when you use the correct semantic element that for interaction, you get a lot of those accessibility wins already. So like here, the first example where we have a span, we have a roll button and a tab index. Does that work? Yes, it does, but it's not the best, because you actually have to add additional parameters like the ARIA labels and such to actually make it fully accessible. When you add on clicks to spans or divs, that's actually a no-no, because those elements aren't actual interactive elements. You're making them interactive, but a lot of times, especially if the user is using a older version of some accessible software, it won't know what that is. It doesn't tell the person, it doesn't relay that information to them. Because, for instance, screen readers have different browse modes that they switch between. And that switch is triggered by the element that is presented. So if you need someone to click a button and you don't place the button there, the screen reader may not switch to the correct browse mode, therefore making it difficult for the user to navigate the rest of your application. So for buttons, you always want to include the type, whether it's a button, whether it's a submit or reset, but you always want to include that. That helps with the navigation. And then, as we're building out our components, you definitely want to have the button, but you want to assign the on click there in addition to the ARIA label if necessary. Tab index and tab order is another big one. What you really don't want to do is set a tab index that is greater than 1. It's very possible to go ahead and number all of your tabbed elements or all of your focusable elements on a page 1 through however many you have. But the problem is this: if your design were to ever change, or even with responsive design, how elements rearrange, what you have now done is that you've told the focus order to jump around, which can be confusing to users. Instead of it being taken care of in a linear fashion, you now start jumping from place to place all over the screen. Using a tab index of 0 will add focusability to a particular element and add it to the tab order. If you use a tab index of -1, that will remove the element from the tab order, which is often the case what you want to do when you don't want somebody to interact with something at a particular time. And then for images, with images, during the survey where they found the issues with the websites, alt tags was one of the highest failures for websites. It's because developers would just place images on there with nothing. And what ends up happening is that individuals who are using screen readers or whatnot, that gets super noisy for them, because if you don't place the alt tag in there, one, you're not telling the user what that image is. So if they have a visual disability, they can't see it, or if they just have low vision, they still can't make out what the image is. A screen reader will read back the actual name of the image instead of the alt tag, which I have here. Decorative images are the same way. You just handle them in a different way. So again, if you don't place anything, a screen reader will speak the name of the image. That can get super noisy, especially if you have a lot of images on the page. But these are for decorative elements. These are images that don't actually provide information, but they're just they're a part of the design. This goes for all image formats, FCGs, PNGs, whatever it is that you're using inside your application. You want to use an alt tag. And if your image is decorative, the alt tag should be empty. This will null it out. And then you can use a role of presentation. Basically, what that will do is that will remove all the semantic meaning for that image. And the screen reader will come through and be like, oh, I don't have any semantic information for this, so therefore I will ignore it. The other method is to use ARIA hidden true. By doing that, it's basically like a display none for CSS, and it just hides the image, not visually, but hides the image from the tab indexing and from the screen readers, from assistive tech. Then we also have headings. Headings was another big area where things failed. A lot of times users who are using assistive devices, they have different methods of navigating websites. Those who are able to use mice and so forth, they'll use a mouse to click around. But there are users who use the headings, also known as landmarks, to navigate through the content on the page. And semantically correct headings should be in sequential order. You should always have at least one, just one H1. You can have as many H2s and H3s, but they should be set up in a way that they structure the hierarchy of the page correctly. So you don't want to have an H2, an H4, an H3, and then an H5. You want to have H2, H3, H4. They should all be in sequential order. And then when it also comes to headings, I've seen a lot of designers do this, especially designers who don't quite understand semantic markup. They will set an explicit size for the actual element itself. Well, and then they will dictate, where that is to be used. Well, the problem with that is you can start to get into the situation where, just like the example here, your headings are all out of order. They don't make any sense. And so when someone is navigating through, they'll go through H1 and they'll jump down to this H1 and then they'll jump up here to an H3 and it can get confusing. What I recommend there is that you use classes to style your heading. That way the markup can be written correctly and your headings can be styled according to how they were actually designed. So when building accessible components, we really want to start with, semantic markup, and then we want to test our components against the WCAG first. Then after that, if you start to find any gaps in your components where the accessibility or the accessible tech is actually failing, that's when you want to start adding the ARIA labels in to fill in those spaces. We got to be careful, be very mindful of over engineering, because when it comes to adding ARIA labels and roles and other tags in there to actually help with the assistive tech, it can actually become problematic for individuals. This right here is a situation that I ran into about a year and a half ago. Had no clue that I was actually even going to do this, but I was looking at how we handled disabled buttons in an application. And it was really interesting to me because all of my screen readers kept coming back saying that the button was dimmed. Well, I'm thinking about that. And to me, you're telling me that it's dimmed. That's telling me how the button is presented, not that it's actually disabled. So me thinking that I was doing something great, I went and over-engineered our disabled state. So now when a button is disabled, based on the Boolean, I would change the ARIA label to read or to report back to the user that it was actually disabled. Then I kind of got a weird feeling about it. So I asked some friends of mine who actually use screen readers all the time because they need to. And they all at the same time smacked my hand and said, no, don't do that. And this is the reason. They are used to hearing dimmed. And when they hear dimmed, they know that that particular element is disabled. The other thing that I did is that I broke internationalization. So by writing in or forcing an ARIA label to have an English word or the English phrase disabled in there, I removed the ability for anyone who was using our application that spoke a foreign language from understanding that this button was now disabled. Because now, instead of it reporting back dimmed in their native tongue, it said disabled in English. Bad idea. So something as simple as a disabled button can be over-engineered. So be mindful of that. And when you go into testing has two sides that we have to be cognizant of. DQ, they have the Axe plugin, a really good testing suite. I highly recommend it. They are also one of two companies that are actually approved for individuals who want to further their education and become accessibility professionals. They actually do the training themselves for that the IAAP actually accepts. But with the Axe plugin, you can get the plugin for Chrome, Firefox, and they also have a GitHub repo that will allow you to download the code yourself and embed it into your build process, which is great. Where I am now over at Guru, we have it embedded in our build process. We also have it embedded in our design system. And we also have it embedded in our PR process as well. So 3 different checks that our site goes through or our code goes through before it actually even gets merged in. Automated testing, though, is not the end all to be all. Like I said, there's two sides to this. Automated testing is going to catch anywhere between 20 to 50%, depending on the criteria that you're testing against. So you have to be very mindful of that. The other part of testing is manual testing. That's where you really start to dig in and find the usability issues that you may have accidentally introduced into your code. Automated testing will catch things like color contrast and semantic errors. That's because we can write tests for those. But the manual test actually is looking at the user experience, the user journey as it goes through. So you have a user journey for anyone that is abled, and you have to be mindful of that. And then we also have the accessible user journey, which can definitely affect anyone who's using assistive tech. Just recently, I came across an audit of a app that I was
Homer, you
working
have
on.
5 minutes left.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I came across a problem where, you know, the path that a user would use while using their mouse was not the same for individuals using the keyboard. In fact, even though the code was semantically correct, from a keyboard perspective, it was wrecked to the point to where we actually have to go back and rethink how we're going to do this. Other tools that can help with manual testing are screen readers. Mac has VoiceOver built into it. If you're running Windows, NVDA is an open source one. It's great. I use that here. And then also JAWS. JAWS is a paid one, but it is also a very good one that you can use. Manual testing will catch, keyboard support. You want to be mindful of tab orders and focus state, and keyboard traps are huge. Keyboard traps are basically when the user is tabbing through or using the keyboard to navigate through when they get to an area of your application where they get stuck, where they can't move any further. That's considered a keyboard trap. You also want to look at how your content is written, error states, form labels, and such. Color contrast. If you have video, you want to be mindful of captions. And then also too, manual testing shows you how your application actually responds when the user is using a screen reader. Great quote here from Haben Girma. Ableism is incredibly limited, and we need to be aware of ableism in all the different ways it comes into our technology. Because when people start to build applications thinking that, people with disabilities don't use our app, clearly the numbers that I showed you earlier prove that wrong. That starts with empathy. Empathy means that we are actually thinking about others outside of ourselves. And there's actually 3 different levels of empathy. We have cognitive. Cognitive means that you are aware of the situation that the person is in. Emotional means that you're able to put yourself in that person's shoes. And compassionate means that you are able to actually act on that. And when you are acting on it, you are effectively consciously making those changes for the better. And how do you apply that? Well, when you want to act on it, when you're testing, what can I see that fits with perceivable? What can I do that falls underneath operable and understandable? How does it work? Does it work with my setup? That goes into robust, ties right back into the 4 principles of accessibility that can all be found inside the WCAG. That's my talk. I hope I didn't blow through it too fast for you guys, but thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that was really awesome, Homer. And yeah, I was holding my breath like, okay, we'll be running out of the time. But yeah, you finished at a very correct time. So you are a great finisher, by the way. And yeah, there were a lot
Thank you.
of lot of stuff I came across, which was really nice about the coding practices and all. So yeah, since we had a question to ask you, but yeah, all those questions would be there in the Q&A session. So yeah, thanks for being here, Homer, and we'll see you soon in the QA session.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.